Content warning. Check the show notes for more information. It's August 3rd, 1917, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Ariel, Rebecca, and Ollie, the Retrospectors.
Came to Asheham, walked out from Lewis, stopped raining for the first time since Sunday. Men mending the wall and roof at Asheham. Will has dug up the bed in front, leaving only one dahlia. Bees in attic chimney. As a diary entry, it's not exactly stirring stuff, but when Virginia Woolf put pen to paper to write it, Today in History in 1917, it marked the start of a new chapter in her life.
Yes, because lots of people know that Virginia Woolf, the modernist author, important figure in the Bloomsbury set and all the rest of it, was a prolific diarist. She wrote more than 500,000 words over 27 years. Some of the entries are like very introspective and all about the creative process and her torment, and some of them are really mundane. You think, why are people reading this? Why is this interesting apart from, you know, like reading any other housewife's account of what it was like living between two wars? And the answers are that we know what was going on in the background. She was writing down what it felt like to come through serious depression, clinical depression, suicide attempts and ideation. And what's important about that diary entry that you just read out, even though it sounds dull, Rebecca, is that the first volume ever of Virginia Woolf's adult diary began in 1915. And it's all quite peppy and fun. And then 2 years, there's nothing. And that's the first entry for 2 years. And the reason is, in between, she's attempted suicide, she's had periods of refusing to eat. And this is almost like her recovery diary. She's at this rented house in rural Sussex. And this is a period of convalescence that you can sort of read now as, like, I guess, kind of trying to self-medicate through nature.
Yeah, but I think the other reason why her diaries have been so interesting is sort of like, it's like the dull moments, the down, unedited moments of Big Brother. You know, you get this real insight into the actual person alongside all of the creative process, as you say.
Virginia Woolf's in the rhododendron.
Yeah, right. But it wasn't the first time that she'd had a breakdown. The sudden death of her mother from rheumatic fever in 1895 had provoked her first breakdown at the age of 13, and then her father's death in 1904 triggered her second collapse. And so when she starts writing again 2 years after this sort of 1915 break, she's now writing from her country home. They're domestic and more clipped, like walked up mushrooming, Elle's leg still bad, saw a large green caterpillar. You know, it really does feel like someone dipping their toes back in the water, but not quite knowing what they're doing or why.
Elle, by the way, is Leonard, Mr. Woolf.
And this really explains the pedestrian nature of the diaries, that she was convalescing and she was under quite a strict regimen. As you mentioned, Leonard was there, but she was also attended by a nurse who was there to enforce a routine that was designed to reduce mental strain as much as possible. Her letters to her friends were to be no longer than one side of paper. So she didn't really have much going on anyway. She wrote to one friend that convalescent life at Asheham was bed walk, bed sleep. And that's kind of the reason why, you know, the Asheham diaries give the picture of someone who is very immersed in nature. Most of the entries are about describing the flora and fauna of the Sussex countryside. And then things like, you know, sewing, gardening, you know, who she's written to, what she's eaten. That's basically it. And there's just a very occasional reminder of the world outside, like when she mentions German prisoners of war working in the fields or the effects of food rationing. And the war had been a turning point for her as well, because just to frame where she is at this point, she's 35 years old. She's only written one published novel. It got decent reviews, but obviously, you know, almost killed her. Not so much the process of writing it, but the process of editing it was very, very stressful. And as you alluded to, she was part of the Bloomsbury set, the kind of, you know, intellectual, bright young things of London of the time. But the breakout of the war had kind of scattered that group. Lots of the men had joined up, and most of the remainder had left London, you know, had gone to do other things, had gone to country homes, etc. So she was kind of without her social circle for the first time as well.
Yeah, and one of the things I do like about reading her entries is she's very honest with herself. I mean, she keeps writing, this is not intended for publication, although Leonard was the one who published it later, so I wonder if privately she'd said to him, I'll go on then. But she does compare herself to her peers in a way that everyone does, really. She says, you know, Eliot came over for dinner and it's made me feel terrible about everything that I'm writing because it's not as good as what he's writing. Or what's the point of carrying on because James Joyce is better? And I was going to think it's quite nice to see that fallibility and vulnerability in someone whose novels are still acclaimed now. 100 years later. But just to give you a sense of just like how dramatic this pivot was from the kind of stylish stuff she wrote in 1915 before she had that first breakdown to the domestic stuff that we're focused on now in 1917. Here's an entry, and apologies for the ableist comments of 1915 in the mouth of Virginia Woolf, but this is something that she wrote on the 9th of January 1915. Quote, "On the towpath," this is in Kingston, "we met and had to pass a long line of imbeciles. The first was a very tall young man, just queer enough to look twice at, but no more. The second shuffled and looked aside, and then one realised that everyone in that long line was a miserable, ineffective, shuffling, idiotic creature, with no forehead or chin, and an imbecile grin, or a suspicious state. It was perfectly horrible. They should certainly be killed." Someone who has firm ideas of what she thinks about the world. And then, here we are 2 years later, and it's literally like, I saw a weed today. Yeah. I went to the water.
And actually, the diary keeps sort of swinging in its mode throughout her life. You know, in the 1920s, as Woolf herself gets busier, more famous, and more focused on writing fiction, you know, she's at work on Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse and Orlando and the Waves. Her diaries become messier and less regular. In fact, between late April and mid-June of 1922, she only writes 2 entries and then pops up to admit, quote, "I was telling lies to Dorothy Bussey the other day about this very book, how I lived in writing and wrote in the streets, and coming home floated it off here." So she was like even telling people that she was keeping up with her diary more than she was. She later hears that her friend E.M. Forster writes whole conversations word for word in his diary, and for a while in 1923 she decides to do the same. But she often then gets interrupted and her diary entries would stop mid-sentence. She often sort of ends things with just "dinner!" exclamation mark. And the question of form keeps coming up for her. It was like how it would interest me if this diary were ever to become a real diary, something in which I could see changes, trace moods developing and so on. So she's sort of like she's at war with herself and her own diarizing throughout the whole process.
And the level of critical and popular as well acclaim that she was able to achieve, as well as these personal demons that she had, and of course her tragic death by suicide in 1941, turned her into this figure of intense fascination for many. She was a very rare example of the sort of female tortured genius trope. So people were very interested in her personal life, including her diaries. She had asked Leonard to destroy all her unpublished work, which he didn't do, but when their home was struck by the Blitz, she also mentions, you know, they were able to go back and save some of the volumes of her diaries. And she called them a great mass for my memoirs. So it's a bit ambiguous whether she was ever thinking about having them published. When Leonard did publish a selection of entries called A Writer's Diary in 1953, he only chose extracts that dealt strictly with literary matters and her writing process. He left aside all of the more intense emotional introspection. But the Diary of Virginia Woolf, which was published in multiple volumes between 1977 and 1984, that was after Leonard had died in 1969.
And they had to forensically put it back together because he'd gone through with scissors cutting out his selections.
He was like, well, we'll never be interested in the rest of this.
Yeah.
In the end, it contained over 770,000 words, revealing not just the personal anguish, but also things that Woolf may have preferred to stay private as well. She was capable of being incredibly nasty. I think we've already given that impression.
I think killing disabled people because they look a bit funny is a good example.
Unkind. Yes. She's very bitchy, very two-faced about people, and just occasionally just jaw-droppingly racist or anti-Semitic, despite the fact that her husband was Jewish. She was
well, especially because her husband was Jewish. She just didn't like that, did she? And it was an outlet.
Yeah, she was had this kind of revulsion of him, and then sort of Jews by extension. It's really just like strange and unpleasant to read. And you know, just in case you're thinking, well, I'm sure after that therapeutic time at Asheham, she got a grip on herself and was kinder to people. One entry from September 1920 runs, "The fact is, the lower classes are detestable."
Right, yeah. But then, I mean, it's that you'll get a statement like that, and then and the daisies are out. And, you know, obviously people are fascinated by her suicide in particular. And so they look at the final entry ever in her diary, and it's sort of a cliche to read it out. But it's a cliche because it is really revealing about all of this. Like, it has everything in it. So this is 1941, so the war is coming, right? And this is a sentence in the middle. L is doing the rhododendrons. The war is coming close. The Germans have taken Libya. I don't think two people could have been happier than we have been. It's like a montage.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the thing that you often get with this. Through all of the parts that reveal that she probably didn't mean for this to be published, and this is a way to get her sort of negativity out. In fact, at one point she says, sneezing and blowing is better than incubating germs. She's specifically saying this is kind of the place where I sneeze away my terrible thoughts.
Oh, God, she'd be a podcaster these days, wouldn't she?
Yeah, she totally
I was just about to say, R.I.P. Virginia Woolf, you'd have loved Twitter.
Now,
This episode first aired last year exclusively to members of Club Retrospectors.
Join today and unlock a new episode this Sunday.
Patreon.com/retrospectors